usually defined in terms of a contrast with what I call manufactured or researcher provoked data. And what we're talking about is what happens in the world without any kind of researcher's intervention. What is out there in the world which is not dependent upon the researcher asking questions or organising a focus group or something of the like. It's a difficult and not hard and fast distinction because, particularly as a sociologist, I'm aware of the dangers of sort of setting up these distinctions and implying that there is some data that is untouched by human hands. And the word natural is a bit difficult in that kind of context because even if things are happening in the world apparently without the researcher's intervention, then they still have to be recorded. So a lot might depend on where you place the camera or the audio recorder. So it's not a hard and fast distinction, it's just one that encourages us to think about what we're doing. Yes, it might be documents that are produced by various agencies, governmental agencies, organisations, professions. It might be what appears on the internet, chat rooms, other material on the internet. It might be interactions that happen every day in the world, like job selection interviews or press conferences or whatever. So anything, all of these things, interactions that are occurring out there in the world or materials produced by agencies in the world come under the heading naturally occurring data. Well, this just came out in a paper I was just listening to at a conference, and the researcher concerned was interested in people working in the field of genetics and on the genome project in particular. And in order to study that, he'd conducted interviews with experts who were working in genomics. And my question to him was, if one wants to find out what is happening in relationship to the genome, why ask people who are working on the genome? Because what I think you're going to get, and indeed this researcher admitted much that this was the case, that what you're going to get is what people tell outsiders about their work. And that has an unknown relationship to what they're actually doing out there. So I said to him, why had he not thought, instead of asking scientists, of studying what they were doing, say, in the laboratory, or studying genetic counselling and see what that looks like, or studying meetings between scientists, or their internet correspondence. And all of these would be naturally occurring data, which wouldn't depend on asking questions of an insider. Because what you're going to get there is, I say, basically an account of the phenomenon, but not one aspect of the phenomenon as it naturally occurs. I mean, there are other reasons for using naturally occurring data, which I can go into if you want me to. Another reason, and I say this particularly as a qualitative researcher, is that when we do our research, there's a danger of losing sight of the phenomena that we're trying to study. So often, when we study something, we begin in a way which is much closer to quantitative researchers by defining the phenomenon at the outset. We say by X I mean Y. And then we set up variables and relate them to one another. That's highly appropriate in quantitative research, to have operational definitions of phenomena. And so you can get quite convincing correlations between these variables as you've defined them. But the way I put it is, in this work, good as it is, the phenomenon escapes, because one's no closer to understanding the black box of interaction, what actually happens in situ in relationship to the thing that you're studying. And this is serious to me, not only methodologically, but it's also serious practically. Just to give one practical example of this, in the 1960s there were a lot of studies that were done of educational attainment, relating the lack of social mobility to children from poor backgrounds being unable to achieve what they should have been doing in the classroom. But these quantitative studies didn't take place side by side with studies of what actually was going on in the classroom. So when we had that in the UK, that great reform of comprehensive education, by and large it was based upon a kind of social engineering model of structures, but not a knowledge of how lessons were taught in classrooms, what actually happened in education, like processes of streaming and so on, and how teachers were relating to different children, which you could only understand by using naturally occurring phenomena. So that policy of comprehensive education had unintended consequences, and I argue some of those unintended consequences were related to the fact that the phenomenon had escaped, that it hadn't yet been based upon studies of classroom interaction. Ultimately, you need both. You need studies, structural studies using quantitative methods, but you also need, to my mind, qualitative studies to get at the phenomenon. And when you combine the two, then you're on very strong ground. My concern is that qualitative researchers either use the quantitative model in a way inappropriate to the work that they're doing, or that they become over-concerned with understanding how participants see things rather than studying how they do things. And hence the focus in qualitative research on research-provoked data gathered by open-ended interviews, which has become quite a dominant aspect of qualitative research. And to my mind, this means the phenomenon escapes, but in a different way, because you're not studying the relationship between variables as quantitative researchers do, but what you're doing is studying things which are not actually looking at how any particular phenomenon is put together by the participants. You're studying how the participants perceive the phenomenon or respond to the phenomenon, rather than what they actually do to produce the features of the phenomenon.